The neon-lit skyline of Orivon 6, a massive galactic trade hub, shimmered against the void of space. It was a place where species from all corners of the universe gathered. Merchants, diplomats, adventurers, and the occasional troublemaker. Among them was Captain Ethan Carter, a human cargo hauler with a knack for getting into unusual situations. Tonight, however, he was simply here for business. Ethan sat in the grand banquet hall of the Zitheri embassy, surrounded by towering bioluminescent alien figures. The Zitheri were a regal and elegant race, their tall, slender forms glowing softly in hues of blue, green, and violet. Their society thrived on diplomacy, art, and intricate traditions, many of which were still a mystery to humans. He had been invited to this gathering by Varita, a Zitheri noblewoman he had met during a trade negotiation months ago. Unlike most Zitheri, who were calm and formal, Varaya was sharp-witted, playful, and seemed to enjoy testing the patience of others. Ethan found her entertaining. She, for some reason, found him fascinating. Captain Carter. Varia's melodic voice interrupted his thoughts. She was standing next to him now, holding a crystal goblet filled with something that glowed faintly, enjoying the celebration. It's certainly different from the usual cargo hauls, Ethan admitted, raising an eyebrow at the floating jellyfish-like creatures that lit the ceiling. I still don't know what we're celebrating, though. Varia's eyes sparkled mischievously. Oh, just a small festival. A time of unity, new bonds, and, well, commitments. Commitments, Ethan repeated, taking a cautious sip of his drink. Indeed. Varaya smiled, stepping onto the raised platform at the center of the room. The hall fell silent as the Zitheri watched her expectantly. Honored guests, she announced, her voice carrying authority and playfulness at the same time. As tradition dictates, I must make an offering of companionship to someone who has proven worthy. Ethan barely paid attention, assuming this was some cultural formality. Then, to his shock, Varaya turned to him, extended a hand, and said with a smirk, "Captain Carter, will you accept my proposal of union?" The room erupted into cheers and glowing patterns flashed across the Zitheri guests' bodies, a sign of excitement. Ethan froze. His brain scrambled for an explanation. Was this a joke? A test? Some weird alien custom? His instincts told him to laugh it off. Maybe bow politely and say something diplomatic like, "I appreciate the honor, but I must decline." But before he could react, Varaya winked. "Come now, Captain, do not tell me humans are afraid of commitment." The crowd watched eagerly. The Zitheri were a species built on honor and tradition, and rejecting an offer outright in such a public setting could be seen as a deep insult. Ethan swallowed. He had two choices: reject her immediately and risk offending an entire alien race. Play along and figure out a way out of this mess later. Ethan cleared his throat, flashing a lopsided grin. Well, who am I to refuse a lady's request? The cheers intensified. Bioluminescent patterns of joy rippled through the Zitheri guests. Varaya tilted her head, watching him with amused satisfaction. Ethan had no idea what he had just agreed to, a diplomatic disaster. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Ethan was bombarded with congratulations, handshakes, and strange ceremonial gestures. He learned that the Zitheri did not believe in casual proposals. Their culture dictated that once a public offer was made and accepted, it was legally binding. In short, he had just accidentally agreed to marry Varia. Care to explain what just happened? Ethan asked once they were finally alone in one of the embassy's quieter chambers. Varia laughed, leaning against the shimmering wall. You accepted my proposal, Captain. That means, by Zitheri law, we are now bonded. Bonded. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. You mean married? She shrugged. More or less. The ceremony itself is a formality, but yes, you are now my official partner in the eyes of my people. Ethan stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Surely she was messing with him. All right, funny joke, he said, Now tell me there's an easy way out of this. Varaya tapped her chin thoughtfully. Well, the only way to annul the bond would be an official rejection before the Grand Council, but that would be seen as an insult and could damage human-Scifi relations. Ethan groaned. Great, so I'm stuck in an interstellar marriage with a woman who thinks pranking humans is fun. Varaya grinned. I promise it won't be too bad. Consider it a diplomatic experiment. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. He had survived space battles, asteroid storms, and trade negotiations with cutthroat warlords, yet somehow this was the most dangerous situation he had ever faced. One thing was clear. This was going to be a very, very interesting journey. Ethan Carter had faced many challenges in his life. Rogue pirates, malfunctioning ship engines, even an angry alien merchant who once tried to charge him triple for spare parts. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for this. He was accidentally married to an alien woman. Not just any alien woman, Varaya of House Lysara, a noble of the Scifi race. And according to their traditions, backing out of this union would not only insult her, but also risk damaging diplomatic relations between humans and Scifi. Ethan sighed as he sat in a beautifully designed chamber inside the Scifi embassy. The walls shimmered with soft, flowing lights, shifting colors in response to emotions. Right now, his section of the room pulsed a dull orange, likely reflecting his deep confusion and frustration. Across from him, Varaya sat with perfect composure, her glowing teal eyes watching him with amusement. So, husband, she said, emphasizing the last word with a teasing smirk, shall we discuss the next steps of our union? Ethan groaned. Do you enjoy seeing me suffer? A little, she admitted, her bioluminescent markings flickering with what he had come to recognize as playfulness. But more than that, I enjoy seeing how humans handle unexpected challenges. And right now, you're doing quite well. Ethan shook his head. All right, let's be serious for a second. There's got to be a way out of this without causing a diplomatic disaster. Varaya leaned back, resting her chin on her hand. Technically, yes. You could go before the Grand Council and officially reject me. Great, Ethan said. Let's do that. She lifted a hand. But if you do, it will be seen as a dishonorable act, implying that you believe Scifi customs are beneath you. The Council might decide that humans are not worthy of formal alliances. Ethan exhaled sharply. So my options are, 1. Stay married to you, or 2. Risk damaging human-Scifi relations forever. Varaya smiled. Yes, those are your choices. Ethan muttered under his breath and rubbed his temples. Of course, it couldn't be simple. After a long pause, he glanced at her. All right. Say I play along. What does that actually mean? Do I have to move to your planet? Do we have some weird alien wedding ceremony? What exactly happens now? Varaya's glow brightened slightly. Oh, nothing so dramatic. For now, we simply spend time together, attend some formal events, and... Wait, formal events? Ethan interrupted. You mean, like, public appearances? Obviously. Varaya grinned. We can't have our union in name only. We must demonstrate it. Otherwise, people will question whether our bond is authentic. Ethan groaned. Great, just great. A public display of affection. The next evening, Ethan found himself dressed in ceremonial Scifi robes, standing in front of a crowd of thousands. The event was a galactic trade summit, and because of his newfound bond with Varaya, he had been given a position of honor. As he stood beside her, trying not to fidget in the flowing silver and blue robes, he whispered, You're enjoying this, aren't you? Varaya smirked. Immensely. A Scifi elder, glowing with golden markings, stepped forward. We celebrate the union of House Lysara and the human representative. May their bond be a symbol of strength between our people. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Ethan forced himself to smile. Then, without warning, Varaya took his hand. Her fingers were warm, her bioluminescent glow spreading faintly to his skin. Ethan stiffened, but she gave him a small, reassuring squeeze. "Relax," she whispered. "You're doing fine." Ethan wasn't sure what surprised him more, the fact that she was actually being sincere, or the fact that her touch was strangely comforting. For the rest of the night, they mingled with diplomats, merchants, and alien officials. Ethan played his role well, smiling, nodding, making polite conversation, but deep down, he couldn't stop thinking about how bizarre his life had become. And yet, despite everything, Varaya wasn't as unbearable as he first thought. Annoying, yes, but not unbearable. A moment of honesty. Later, as they walked back toward the embassy, Ethan finally sighed. "All right, I'll admit it. You handled that well." Varaya raised an eyebrow. "Why, thank you, husband." "Don't push it," Ethan muttered, but he was smiling. They stopped near a balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape of Orivon 6. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was filled with the hum of distant hovercrafts and the soft glow of neon lights. Then, Varaya surprised him. "You know," she said, her tone softer than usual, "I never actually expected you to say yes." Ethan blinked. "You didn't." She shook her head. "It was meant to be a joke, a challenge. I wanted to see if you'd laugh it off or stumble through a diplomatic excuse. I never thought you'd actually accept." Ethan exhaled a laugh. "Well, joke's on both of us. Huh." She chuckled. Indeed. A comfortable silence settled between them. For the first time since this mess started, Ethan felt something shift, a strange understanding between them. "Varaya," he said after a moment, "this whole thing started as a mistake, but maybe it doesn't have to be a bad one." Varaya studied him, her glowing eyes unreadable. Then she smiled, not teasing, not playful, but genuine. "Perhaps not," she agreed. And just like that, their marriage became something neither of them had expected, the start of something far more real than either had planned. Ethan Carter had accepted many difficult missions in his life, hauling unstable cargo through asteroid fields, negotiating with stubborn alien traders, even surviving a pirate attack once. But none of that compared to what he was facing now, an official Zitheri marriage ritual. He still wasn't sure how he had ended up here. One moment, he had been trying to find a way out of this accidental engagement. The next, he was standing in the center of a grand ceremonial hall, surrounded by glowing Zitheri nobles, preparing to go through a series of marriage trials. "This is insane," Ethan muttered under his breath. Varaya, standing beside him, gave him a teasing smile. "Come now, husband. Try to enjoy the experience." He shot her a look. "You could have at least warned me before I walked into an official ritual. I thought surprises were more fun." Ethan sighed. He had learned something very important about Varaya over the past few days. She loved mischief. Unfortunately, mischief was the least of his worries right now. The first trial, the Unity Feast. The first trial was simple, or so Ethan had thought. He and Varaya had to hunt and prepare a traditional Zitheri dish together. The creature in question, a Solith beast, a floating jellyfish-like alien that had a habit of electrifying anything that touched it. "Great," Ethan muttered as he held a net, watching the glowing creature drift lazily above a small pond. "How exactly do we catch something that zaps people?" Varaya smirked. "With skill." Before he could ask what that meant, she lunged forward with a sleek energy blade, moving with incredible speed. Ethan barely had time to react before the Solith beast dodged and sent out a crackling pulse of electricity. "Careful," he yelped, stumbling backward. Varaya laughed. "Don't tell me you're scared, Captain." "I'm not scared," Ethan muttered, gripping his net. "I just prefer not to be electrocuted on my wedding day." After a few failed attempts, and some very close calls, they finally managed to corner the beast. Varaya used her blade to drive it toward Ethan, and with a well-timed throw, he caught it in the net. The Zitheri nobles clapped in approval, their glowing markings shifting to a soft blue, a sign of respect. Ethan panted, shaking his head. Please tell me that was the hardest trial. Varya simply smiled. Oh, we're just getting started. The second trial, the soul dance. Ethan wasn't much of a dancer. In fact, the last time he had danced, it had been at a spaceport bar after a few too many drinks. Now, however, he was expected to perform a sacred Sci-Fi bonding dance in front of an entire audience. Varya, of course, was graceful and flawless, moving with elegant precision. Ethan, on the other hand, well, he was trying his best not to look like a malfunctioning robot. Loosen up, Captain, Varya whispered as she spun around him, her bioluminescent markings shifting in rhythm with the music. It's supposed to be natural. Natural for you, maybe, Ethan grumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet. The dance wasn't just about movement. It was about sensing their energy. Sci-Fi markings changed based on emotions, and during this ritual, their patterns were supposed to align as a sign of unity. Ethan had been skeptical, but as they moved together, something strange happened. For the first time, he stopped thinking and just let himself move. His breathing matched hers. His steps, though clumsy at first, started to fall into place. And then, his own body began to glow. The audience gasped in surprise. Humans didn't have Sci-Fi bioluminescence, but in this moment, Ethan's skin shimmered faintly, reflecting Varya's colors. She stared at him, wide-eyed. Impossible, she whispered. Ethan had no idea what had just happened, but the elders seemed very, very pleased. The final trial. The trial of harmony. Ethan barely had time to process what had happened during the dance before the final trial was announced. Survive for 3 days together on an untamed moon, relying only on each other. Ethan groaned. You've got to be kidding me. Nope, Varya said cheerfully. Pack light. The next thing he knew, they were dropped off on a dense jungle moon, surrounded by towering alien trees, strange glowing plants, and the distant sounds of something large growling nearby. Ethan crossed his arms. I take it back. This is the worst wedding tradition I've ever heard of. Varya grinned. Come on, Captain. What's a marriage without a little adventure? Over the next few days, Ethan and Varya had to work together to survive. They built shelter, foraged for food, and avoided some very unfriendly wildlife. At first, Ethan thought he would hate every second of it. But surprisingly, he didn't. Varya was fiercely intelligent, resourceful, and surprisingly fun to be around. And somewhere between building a fire and fending off a giant insect, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just an accident anymore. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't mind being bonded to her after all. Ethan Carter never thought his wedding would involve surviving on an alien moon, but here he was covered in dirt, slightly hungry, and currently hiding from a massive, 6-legged predator. The beast, a Gorvax stalker, was nearly the size of a hovercar, with dark, armored skin and glowing red eyes. It sniffed the air, its sharp claws digging into the damp earth as it searched for its prey. Which, unfortunately, was him and Varya. Ethan crouched behind a large rock, trying not to breathe too loudly. So, he whispered, tell me again why this ridiculous trial is part of a wedding. Varya, hiding beside him, gave him an amused glance. It's about trust and survival. A couple must prove they can rely on each other in extreme situations. Ethan sighed. Great. Next time, let's just have a cake-cutting ceremony instead. Varya smirked. Too late for that now, husband. Ethan rolled his eyes. He was still getting used to her calling him that, though, if he was being honest, he didn't mind it as much as before. The Gorvax let out a deep, rumbling growl. It was close now. Ethan glanced at Varya. All right, genius, any plans? She tapped her chin, her bioluminescent markings shifting in thought. We need to distract it and lead it away from our shelter. Ethan looked down at the small dagger he had inside. Wonderful. because I was really hoping to fight a giant alien monster today. Varaya smirked. Don't worry. I'll do the distracting. You just be ready to run. Before Ethan could protest, she jumped out from behind the rock and whistled loudly. The Gorvax immediately spun toward her, its eyes locking onto the glowing Zitheri. Varaya moved fast, dodging its first attack with impressive agility. The beast lunged, but she flipped backward, landing gracefully on her feet. Ethan didn't have time to admire her skill. He needed to act fast. Gripping a nearby branch, he sprinted toward the beast's side and smashed the branch against a weak spot near its leg joints. The Gorvax let out a roar of pain and turned toward him. "Avo," Ethan muttered. Before the beast could strike, Varaya leaped onto its back, using her dagger to dig into its thick hide. The Gorvax thrashed wildly, trying to shake her off. "Ethan," she called. "Aim for the neck joint." Ethan hesitated for only a second before running forward. One good hit, that's all he needed. Using all his strength, he drove his weapon straight into the creature's weak spot. The Gorvax let out one final roar before collapsing onto the ground, twitching for a moment before going completely still. Ethan exhaled sharply, catching his breath. "Please tell me that was the only one." Varaya hopped down, brushing dust off her armor. "If we're lucky." Ethan groaned. "I hate this planet." Varaya grinned. "But you love me, right?" Ethan opened his mouth, ready to give a sarcastic response. But the words got stuck in his throat. Because, in that moment, as she stood there, grinning, glowing, and completely fearless, he realized something. He actually liked her. Maybe even more than liked. The unexpected confession. That night, after ensuring there were no more Gorvax nearby, they sat by a small fire near their shelter. Ethan poked at the flames with a stick, his mind racing. Varaya sat beside him, watching him with an amused expression. "You're thinking too much again." Ethan exhaled. "You ever think this whole thing is crazy?" Varaya tilted her head. "The trial, or our marriage?" Ethan gave her a pointed look. She chuckled. "Of course. But I've learned something important in life. The best things often start in the strangest ways." Ethan shook his head with a small smile. "You're impossible." She smirked. "And yet, you seem to enjoy my company." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, fine. I admit it. You're not as bad as I thought." Varaya gasped dramatically. High praise from the great Captain Carter. Ethan rolled his eyes but laughed. "Don't make me regret it." For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, just watching the fire. Then, Varaya spoke softly. "Ethan, do you ever wonder if maybe this wasn't an accident?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before answering. "Maybe we were meant to meet. Maybe this was supposed to happen." Ethan looked at her, studying her face. For the first time, he saw uncertainty in her expression, a hint of vulnerability beneath her usual confidence. And in that moment, he realized something important. This wasn't just a game anymore. This wasn't just an accidental marriage or a diplomatic issue or a series of ridiculous trials. This was real. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. Maybe they were meant to find each other. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to run from this anymore. With a small smile, he reached out and took her hand. Varaya blinked in surprise, but then her glowing markings brightened, a Zitheri sign of happiness. Ethan chuckled. "Well, if we're going to do this, we might as well make it interesting." Varaya squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "Oh, Captain, I wouldn't expect anything less." And for the first time since this crazy adventure began, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The final night of their survival trial arrived, and Ethan Carter found himself staring at the alien sky, a mix of deep purples and glowing blues. The twin moons of the Zitheri home system hung above, casting a soft light over the jungle clearing where he and Varaya sat. He should have been exhausted. 3 days of hunting, running, and almost getting eaten by alien creatures had pushed him to his limits. But instead, he felt something else. Something new. Something he wasn't ready to name yet. Varaya sat next to him, sharpening the blade of her dagger with a smooth, practiced motion. Her glowing markings shifted to a soft blue, signaling contentment. She looked so calm, so at ease, like she had always belonged here, no matter the dangers. Ethan wasn't sure when he had stopped thinking of this as a trial and started seeing it as an adventure with her. He rubbed his face, sighing. "All right, be honest with me, Varya. Would we have actually failed if we didn't do all this perfectly?" She smirked, not looking up from her dagger. "Technically, no." Ethan groaned. "You mean we didn't have to fight off a Gorvak stalker?" She finally glanced at him, her eyes dancing with amusement. "It was fun, wasn't it?" Ethan gave her a dry look. "That's one word for it." Varaya chuckled, placing her dagger aside. "The point of the trial isn't perfection, Captain. It's to see how we work together in the face of challenges. And I think we did pretty well." Ethan considered that. She wasn't wrong. Despite their differences, human and Zitheri, pilot and warrior, serious and playful, they had learned how to rely on each other. And it had felt right. The thought was dangerous, because if he admitted that, then he had to admit that maybe, just maybe, this marriage wasn't a mistake after all. A test of fire. Suddenly, a loud crackling sound broke the peaceful silence. Ethan sat up. What was that? Varaya frowned, her markings shifting to a deep yellow. Concern. Then they saw it. A fire. The jungle, dry from the recent heatwave, had caught a spark from their fire pit. The flames spread quickly, racing up the alien trees, thick smoke rising into the air. "Damn it," Ethan cursed, grabbing a large branch to try and smother the flames. Varaya was already moving, grabbing a flask of water from their supplies and tossing it onto the nearest burning patch. But it wasn't enough. The fire was spreading too fast. "We have to move," she said urgently. "If we stay here, we'll be trapped." Ethan looked at the trees surrounding them. The fire was creeping toward their only exit. If they didn't leave now, they might not get out at all. "All right," he said. "Follow me." A leap of faith. They ran. The jungle blazed around them, heat licking at their backs. Smoke stung Ethan's eyes as he pushed forward, focusing only on the path ahead. Then, a deep crevice appeared in their way. Ethan skidded to a stop. The gap was wide, with sharp rocks at the bottom. There was no way around it. Varaya stopped beside him, panting. "We jump." Ethan stared at her. "That's insane." She grinned. "Then it's perfect for us." The fire roared behind them. They had no choice. Varaya went first. With a powerful leap, she soared across the gap, landing gracefully on the other side. Ethan took a deep breath. "Oh, this is a terrible idea," he muttered. Then he jumped. For a second, he was weightless. Then, his foot slipped on the landing. He felt himself falling backward, but before he could plummet into the crevice, a strong hand grabbed his wrist. Varaya. She held onto him tightly, her muscles straining as she pulled him up. Ethan scrambled onto solid ground, breathing hard. He looked at her, still gripping her arm. "You saved me." She smirked, though there was something softer in her eyes. "Well, husband, I can't let you die before we even finish the trial." Ethan huffed out a laugh. "You know, at some point, I'm going to save you, just to even the score." Varaya grinned. "I look forward to it." They sat there for a moment, catching their breath as the fire raged behind them, now blocked by the crevice. And in that quiet space, with only the sound of their hearts pounding, something shifted between them. It wasn't just survival anymore. It wasn't just an accident. Ethan realized, with a strange sense of certainty, that he didn't want to go back to life before this. Before her. The truth between them. They made their way to a clearing, where a rescue drone was waiting. The trial was over. They had won. As they boarded the transport back to the Zitheri capital, Ethan found himself watching Varia. She caught his gaze and tilted her head. "What is it?" He hesitated, then said, "This wasn't what I expected." Varia chuckled. "You mean the marriage? Or the trial?" Ethan exhaled. "Both." He paused. Then, before he could overthink it, he added, "But I'm not sure I'd change it." Varia's glowing markings brightened, and something warm flickered in her expression. For once, she didn't tease. She didn't joke. She just smiled. And Ethan knew, in that moment, that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The rescue transport hummed softly as it soared through the sky, taking Ethan and Varia back to the Zitheri capital. Ethan sat by the window, watching the jungle disappear beneath them. The fire had died down, leaving behind a trail of smoke in the distance. It was over. The survival trial was complete. They had won. But instead of feeling relieved, Ethan felt unsettled. Not because of the trial itself, but because of what had changed between them. Varia sat across from him, idly adjusting the straps on her armor. Her glowing markings pulsed faintly, a sign she was deep in thought. Ethan knew he should say something. Maybe a joke, maybe a simple comment about how ridiculous this whole thing had been. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, he didn't want to joke about it anymore. Somewhere between the fights, the laughter, and the trust they had built in the past few days, he had stopped thinking of this as a mistake. And that scared him more than any alien beast ever could. A city that feels different now. The capital city of Zithar was breathtaking, as always. Towering spires of silver and glass stretched toward the sky. Glowing pathways wove between buildings like rivers of light, and the air was filled with the soft hum of alien energy fields. But to Ethan, it felt different now. Before, it had seemed like a strange, unfamiliar place, an advanced city full of rules and traditions he didn't understand. Now, it was her home. And suddenly, that made it feel a little bit like his home too. As they stepped off the transport, a group of Zitheri officials approached, their robes shimmering under the city's twin suns. An older Zitheri woman with deep blue markings smiled at them. "You have completed the trial of union. You have proven yourselves as partners." Ethan opened his mouth to say something sarcastic, but Varia squeezed his hand lightly before he could. And just like that, the words died in his throat. The official continued, "Tonight, there will be a formal gathering to honor your success. You will stand before the council and speak your vows." Ethan blinked. Vows. Varia turned to him, her expression unreadable. A declaration of partnership, of unity. Ethan hesitated. "And if we don't?" The official's expression didn't change. "Then your bond will not be recognized." Unrecognized. The word stuck in Ethan's mind. This was it. This was the moment where he had to decide. Was this real, or was it just another mission that he would walk away from? He looked at Varia. She was watching him carefully, her glowing eyes searching his face for something. He wasn't sure what she saw, but after a moment, she gave him a small smile and said, "You don't have to decide now." A conversation under the stars. That night, Ethan found himself on a balcony overlooking the city, the stars shining bright above him. He had spent most of the evening avoiding people, trying to make sense of everything in his head. Footsteps sounded behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Varia walked up beside him, her gaze following his toward the stars. "You look like a man with too many thoughts," she said lightly. Ethan chuckled. "You're not wrong." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Then, Ethan finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Did you know?" Varia glanced at him. "Know what?" "That this whole thing would change us." Varia was quiet for a moment before answering. "I suspected." She turned to face him fully. But I didn't expect you to change. Ethan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She smiled, but it wasn't teasing this time. You were a man who didn't believe in destiny, who didn't believe in fate, and yet here you are, standing beside me, questioning everything you thought you knew. Ethan let out a breath. Yeah, well, you make it hard to stick to my old ways. Varia's markings glowed softly. Ethan, what do you want? That was the question, wasn't it? What did he want? To leave, to return to his old life, where things were simple, where he didn't have to worry about feelings or bonds or alien wedding vows. Or did he want this? Did he want her? Ethan exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. You know, I used to think love was supposed to be simple. Varia tilted her head. And now? He chuckled. Now I think it's supposed to be exactly like this. A challenge, an adventure, a partnership. Varia's expression softened. Then, Captain Carter, I hope you're ready for what comes next. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't feel uncertain anymore. He reached out and took her hand. And this time, when he spoke, there was no hesitation in his voice. I think I've been ready for a while. The grand hall of the Sci-Fi Council was filled with soft, glowing lights. Ethereal music drifted through the air, blending with the quiet hum of conversation as dignitaries, warriors, and officials gathered for the ceremony. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls, the twin moons casting their glow over everything. Ethan Carter had faced space battles, survival trials, and alien beasts. But standing here, at the center of this grand hall, he felt something he hadn't expected: nervousness. Beside him, Varia stood tall, regal as ever, her glowing markings shifting in calm waves. She was dressed in traditional Sci-Fi ceremonial armor, polished silver plates that reflected the soft light around them. She looked powerful, beautiful. Ethan, in contrast, was wearing formal Sci-Fi robes, flowing fabric with intricate designs woven in silver and deep blue. It was far from his usual pilot's uniform, and it made him feel strangely exposed. The Sci-Fi Council leader, an elder with wise, glowing eyes, stepped forward. The murmurs in the room quieted as she raised her voice. Varia, daughter of Zithar, and Ethan Carter, son of Earth, you have completed the trial of union. You have proven your strength, trust, and commitment to each other. Ethan swallowed hard. This was it, the moment of truth. The elder turned to Varia first. Varita, do you accept Ethan Carter as your partner, your equal in bond and honor, to stand beside you in battle and in peace? Varia's gaze met Ethan's. For once, there was no teasing, no games. I do. The elder nodded, then turned to Ethan. And Ethan Carter, do you accept Varia as your partner, to honor this bond, to trust and stand by her, in the ways of your people and hers? Ethan took a deep breath. He glanced at Varia again. In her glowing eyes, he saw everything they had been through. The laughter, the challenges, the way she had pulled him up when he almost fell, the way she had looked at him last night when she asked, "What do you want?" This wasn't a duty anymore. It was his choice, and he had already made it. I do. A bond forged in fire and choice. A soft murmur rippled through the hall. The elder raised her hands, and a thin, glowing thread of light appeared between Ethan and Varia, symbolizing their bond. It flickered, then solidified, a visual representation of the partnership they had chosen. It is done, the elder announced. The bond is sealed. The hall erupted in cheers and applause. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Varia turned to him, her lips curving into a smirk. Well, Captain Carter, looks like you're officially stuck with me. Ethan chuckled. Somehow, I think I'll survive. The dance of stars. As the formal part of the ceremony ended, the atmosphere shifted into celebration. Sci-Fi warriors performed synchronized battle dances. Energy lights flickered in mesmerizing patterns, and music filled the hall. Ethan found himself dragged into a dance by Varya, who grinned as she pulled him toward the open floor. "I don't know how to dance like this," he admitted. Varya raised an eyebrow. "Then I suppose you'll have to trust me." He did. As they moved together, their steps uncertain at first, but then falling into rhythm, Ethan realized something. This wasn't just a marriage of convenience, nor was it simply a diplomatic arrangement. This was real. And despite everything, the unexpected proposal, the survival trial, the fire, the doubts, he wouldn't change a thing. As they swayed under the lights of the grand hall, with the stars watching from above, Ethan looked at Varya and smiled. "All right, wife," he said, the word feeling strangely right on his tongue. "What comes next?" Varya smirked. "An adventure, Captain." And with that, they danced into the future, together.